The human who defied fate. The U.S. Valiant glided through the endless expanse of space, its sleek silver hull cutting through the void like a blade. Inside, the ship hummed with quiet efficiency as it approached the Sci-Fi system, a region shrouded in mystery. Humanity's diplomatic corps had arranged a first contact meeting with the Sci-Fi, a reclusive but technologically advanced species. Lieutenant Dane Carter, a decorated security officer, had been assigned to oversee the safety of the diplomatic envoy. Dane wasn't nervous. He had faced worse. His sharp blue eyes scanned the approaching fleet on the bridge's holodisplay. The Sci-Fi ships were unlike anything he had ever seen. Organic in design, their dark, sinewy structures pulsed with an eerie bioluminescence. A sense of unease settled over the crew as the alien ships hovered in formation. A shrill chime signaled an incoming transmission. The massive central view screen flickered, revealing the Sci-Fi delegation. Their leader, High Emissary Xyra, had an air of cold regality. Her violet-hued skin shimmered under the dim lighting of her vessel, her golden eyes narrowing as she examined the humans before her. But Dane barely noticed her. His attention was drawn elsewhere. Standing slightly behind Xyra was Alara, a younger female delegate whose gaze burned into him like a solar flare. Unlike the others, her expression wasn't stoic. Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, her fingers trembling at her sides. Her iridescent skin deepened to a richer shade of violet, and her golden eyes dilated, locked onto him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. Dane furrowed his brow. What the hell? Xyra's voice was measured and controlled. Welcome, humans. You stand before the Sci-Fi High Council, the protectors of ancient knowledge, and the stewards of our future. Captain Marin Vasquez stepped forward, her tone warm but diplomatic. We come in peace, emissary. Humanity seeks knowledge, cooperation, and mutual prosperity. The usual pleasantries unfolded, but Dane wasn't listening. Alara was still staring. No, fixating on him. Then she shuddered, gripping the table for balance, her breath hitching in her throat. Her entire body trembled as if something had overtaken her. A whispered murmur rippled through the Sci-Fi delegation. Xyra's expression darkened. Alara, she said sharply, control yourself. But Alara was beyond control. With a desperate gasp, she took a staggering step forward. The guards beside her tensed, their hands drifting toward their weapons. Her golden eyes burned with something primal, her voice quivering with restrained urgency. He is the one. The room fell into stunned silence. Dane barely had time to react before the Sci-Fi guards moved. They lunged toward him. Instinct kicked in. Dane sidestepped, his reflexes honed by years of combat training. The first guard swung a plasma staff, but Dane caught the motion in his periphery, ducking just in time. The weapon whistled through the air, missing his head by inches. The second guard was faster. He brought his weapon down in a brutal arc, aiming to incapacitate, but Dane twisted his body, catching the guard's arm and using his own momentum to flip him onto the floor. Alara let out a sharp cry, rushing toward him. Stop. Do not harm him. Captain Vasquez drew her sidearm. What the hell is going on here? Xyra's gaze was cold, calculating. It seems the prophecy speaks true. Dane, still catching his breath, glared at her. What prophecy? Alara's voice was a desperate whisper. You are the catalyst, the one foretold to awaken the Sci-Fi's ancient lineage. Dane exhaled sharply. That means nothing to me. Xyra's lips curled into a knowing smirk. It will. Before he could react, a high-pitched tone filled the air. A transport beam activated. And just like that, Dane Carter disappeared, teleported onto an alien world. Trapped on an alien world. Dane Carter's vision blurred as the sudden disorientation of teleportation washed over him. His body tingled from the energy surge, his breath catching in his throat. When his vision cleared, he found himself no longer aboard the U.S. Valiant. He stood on an alien world, bathed in an eerie violet glow. Towering crystalline structures stretched toward the sky, their translucent surfaces pulsing with a soft inner light. The air smelled of something unfamiliar, a mix of ozone and blooming flora. A distant hum vibrated through the ground, resonating with the energy around him. He wasn't alone. Alara stood before him, her golden eyes filled with a mix of reverence and desperation. Her chest rose and fell with labored breaths, her trembling fingers reaching toward him as if he might vanish at any moment. "What the hell did you just do?" Dane demanded, stepping back instinctively. His hand hovered near his belt, but his sidearm was gone. Alara's lips parted, her voice shaking. I had no choice. No choice. Dane's frustration flared. "You just abducted me from my ship." Alara swallowed hard, looking away. The crystalline ground beneath them shimmered in response to her unease. "If I hadn't taken you, they would have." Dane narrowed his eyes. "They?" Before she could answer, a deep, resonant chime echoed across the landscape. Dane turned, spotting a group of Sci-Fi warriors approaching from the distance. Their long, flowing robes billowed behind them. But their ceremonial staffs weren't just for show. The glowing energy cores at the tips pulsed with latent power. Alara's expression darkened. "The Council Guardians. They will take you to the High Sanctum." Dane clenched his fists. "And if I refuse?" Alara's eyes met his, sorrowful yet determined. "You won't have a choice." Before he could react, the lead guardian raised his staff. A pulse of energy shot from its tip, slamming into Dane's chest. His world went dark. The awakening. Dane awoke to the feeling of cold stone beneath him. A soft hum reverberated through the chamber, and as he pushed himself upright, he realized he was inside an ancient temple-like structure. The room was vast, lined with towering pillars engraved with glowing Sci-Fi runes. At the far end, seated on a raised platform, was Tyra, the same high emissary from before. But now she was dressed in ceremonial garb, adorned with intricate metallic bands that pulsed with energy. Alara stood at her side, avoiding Dane's gaze. Tyra leaned forward, her golden eyes piercing into him. "Do you understand now, human?" Dane gritted his teeth. "All I understand is that I've been kidnapped." Zyra's expression remained unreadable. "You were brought here because you are the catalyst." He let out a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, I keep hearing that. Care to explain?" Alara finally spoke, her voice quieter now. "The Sci-Fi people are at a crossroads. Our bloodline, it is fading. Our future uncertain." Sarah continued. "Our ancestors foretold of a being from the void beyond, a warrior of unmatched strength, a being whose presence would awaken the dormant power within us." Dane crossed his arms. "And you think that's me?" Alara's breath hitched. "I don't think. I know." Zyra gestured toward him. "When you stepped aboard our vessel," Alara's reaction confirmed it. The prophecy was clear. When the Chosen One arrives, the Sci-Fi's bloodline will begin its rebirth. Dane frowned, piecing the implications together. "You mean, this reaction she's having?" Alara took a hesitant step closer, her voice almost a whisper. "It is a biological imperative, a connection that cannot be ignored." Dane's mind reeled. "They believe I'm some kind of savior." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is insane." Zyra's expression remained resolute. "You do not have to understand it. You only need to accept what you are." Alara's golden eyes met his once more. "You are the key to our survival." Before Dane could process her words, the chamber doors burst open. A robed figure stormed inside, his eyes burning with fury. Unlike the others, his presence was menacing, his aura suffocating. The guards tensed but did not stop him. Zyra's lips thinned. "High Warden Kale." Kale's glare pierced into Dane like a dagger. "This human is an abomination to our people." His voice was thick with disdain. You dare bring an outsider into our sacred prophecy. Dane immediately disliked him. Zyra held firm. The prophecy speaks for itself. Kel's fingers curled into fists. Then the prophecy is a lie. Alara stiffened beside Dane. You fear change. Kel sneered. I fear nothing. But I will not allow a mere human to dictate the fate of our people. Dane took a step forward. You're making a lot of assumptions about me, pal. Kel's eyes burned with hatred. Then prove me wrong, human. In an instant, he drew his energy blade, the weapon igniting in a crackling arc of violet plasma. Dane's pulse quickened. He had no weapons, no armor. He was outmatched. And yet something deep inside him stirred, a primal instinct, an undeniable pull. Kel smirked. Let's see if the catalyst can fight. With lightning speed, he lunged. Dane dodged, barely escaping the burning edge of the blade. His mind raced. He had no weapons, no plan. But as Kel swung again, something awakened within him. A pulse of energy erupted from Dane's hands, sending Kel flying backward. The entire room went silent. Alara's breath caught. It's true. Dane stared at his hands, still crackling with power. For the first time, fear flickered in Kel's eyes. Zyra rose to her feet. The catalyst has awoken. Dane's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what had just happened. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Dane's hands still crackled with the strange energy that had just erupted from his body. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Across from him, Kel had barely pushed himself up, his expression shifting from rage to something darker. Fear. The High Warden's gaze flickered between Dane's hands and Zyra, his breath uneven. Zyra stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with something Dane couldn't quite place. It is as the prophecy foretold. The catalyst has awoken. Dane clenched his fists, the residual energy dissipating into the air. He didn't understand what had just happened, but one thing was clear. He wasn't in control of it. His heart pounded against his ribs as he turned toward Alara, who was staring at him in pure awe. Kel wiped the dust from his robes and straightened himself, his jaw tightening. This proves nothing. His voice was colder now, more measured, as if he were already recalculating his approach. The power of the Zyfari should not exist in an outsider. Zyra lifted her chin, her authority absolute. Yet it does. Alara took a cautious step toward Dane. He noticed the way her hands trembled at her sides, the way she seemed to be struggling with her own reaction to him. Something about his presence affected her deeply, more than she was letting on. He wasn't just the so-called catalyst. He was triggering something primal in her, something she couldn't seem to control. Kel turned sharply. This changes nothing. You would place our entire future in the hands of a human, a species that is reckless, unpredictable, and unworthy. His eyes flicked back to Dane. You may have stumbled into power, but you will never be one of us. Dane exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders, forcing himself to stay calm. He had no idea what kind of game he had just been pulled into, but he sure as hell wasn't going to be a passive piece on the board. I didn't ask for any of this, he said, his voice steady. But you're the ones who dragged me here, and now you're telling me I'm part of some prophecy. Maybe instead of throwing insults, you explain what's really going on. Zyra turned to him. You are right to ask. She gestured toward the grand chamber's towering walls, where intricate symbols pulsed with faint energy. The Zyfari have long been a people bound by the limitations of our bloodline. Over centuries, our connection to the energy that once flowed through us has weakened, fading to near extinction. The prophecy foretold that one day, an outsider would arrive, a being whose presence would reignite what was lost. Dane frowned, shaking his head. That still doesn't explain why I'm the one. Alara's breath hitched, and when she finally spoke, it was almost reverent. Because I felt it the moment I saw you. Dane looked at her, really looked this time. There was something raw in her expression, something beyond words. She had been shaken from the moment they locked eyes back on the ship, and now he understood why. She had been waiting for something, searching for something, and somehow, without meaning to, he had become it. Cale stepped between them, his face twisted in disgust. "You cannot truly believe this." Zaira exhaled, as if already tired of the argument. "You have seen it with your own eyes. His presence alone has reawakened the dormant energy. Deny it all you like, but the truth stands before you." Cale's jaw locked, and Dane knew the man wasn't about to back down. He had seen men like him before, proud, unwilling to accept when the ground beneath them shifted. That made him dangerous. Zaira turned her attention back to Dane. "You must begin training immediately." Dane stiffened. "Training?" Elara finally found her voice. "If you do not learn to control the power within you, it will consume you." A chill ran down his spine. He thought back to that moment when the energy had surged from its hands, the way it had acted on its own. If he didn't learn how to control it, what would happen the next time it came unbidden? The idea of losing control, of becoming something dangerous, unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Zaira gestured toward the exit of the chamber. "You will train under Elara. She is the only one who has felt the connection firsthand." Dane hesitated. The moment stretched between them, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Everything inside him screamed that this was insane, that he should be fighting to get back to the Valiant, back to the life he understood. And yet, something in Elara's gaze anchored him. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. Finally, he exhaled and gave a single nod. Elara's breath caught, and for the first time since he had arrived, her lips curled into the faintest ghost of a smile. Cale, on the other hand, turned and stalked away, his expression promising that this was far from over. Dane didn't know what he had just agreed to. But whatever it was, there was no turning back now. The training ground was unlike anything Dane had ever seen. The vast chamber stretched beneath an open sky, surrounded by towering crystalline structures that pulsed with faint energy. The air itself seemed alive, charged with something unseen yet undeniably present. He could feel it humming beneath his skin, an invisible current waiting to be harnessed. Elara stood across from him, her golden eyes filled with an unreadable mixture of anticipation and hesitation. She had changed into something more suited for combat. Sleek, dark material that hugged her form, allowing for full mobility. Her hands, delicate yet strong, hovered at her sides, fingers twitching with restrained energy. Dane exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "So, where do we start?" Elara studied him for a moment before stepping closer. "You felt it, didn't you? When you fought Cale? That surge of power?" He nodded, still uncertain. "I don't know where it came from." Elara lifted a hand, palm up. A soft glow flickered to life at her fingertips, dancing like liquid fire. "It's within you now. The moment our energies connected, something awakened inside you. You must learn to control it, or it will control you." Dane glanced at his own hands, clenching them into fists. "And if I can't?" Her expression darkened. "Then it will consume you." He didn't like the sound of that. Elara took a step back, widening the space between them. "We begin with the fundamentals. The energy within you responds to will, to intent. You must learn to call it forth, to shape it." She spread her hands. "Close your eyes. Feel for it." Dane exhaled sharply, but he did as she said. The sounds of the chamber faded, leaving only the rhythmic pulse beneath his skin, the steady hum in the air around him. He reached for it, searching. A sudden jolt of force slammed into his chest, sending him stumbling back. His eyes snapped open as he barely caught his footing, Elara lowering her hand from where she had just launched an energy pulse at him. "What the hell?" he growled. Elara remained impassive. "You cannot hesitate. You cannot just wait for it to come to you. You must pull it from within, shape it as I do." Dane narrowed his eyes. "Fine." He planted his feet, inhaled deeply, and focused. He thought back to the moment it had happened before, the way it had burst from him, raw and unrestrained. He reached for that same feeling, pushing. The energy surge, wild and uncontrolled. The force of it sent him flying backward, slamming hard against the crystalline floor. A sharp pain shot up his spine, knocking the breath from his lungs. Alara approached, offering a hand. Too much at once. You are trying to force it, not guide it. Dane ignored his bruised pride and took her hand, pulling himself up. So, what? I just ask it nicely. She almost smiled. Almost. More like a negotiation. The energy is part of you now, but it does not yet know you. It will resist until you learn to move with it. Dane sighed, shaking his head. Great. I have to befriend the magic inside me. Alara tilted her head. Magic. Never mind. She stepped back again, taking her stance. Again. This time, Dane focused differently. Instead of forcing the energy outward, he tried to feel it, to move with it instead of against it. He thought of the way Alara manipulated it with ease, the way it obeyed her command. He reached, gently, steadily. The energy responded. A flicker of light danced around his fingers, soft and unstable, but present. It hummed, shifting with his breath. He barely had time to register the moment before Alara struck again, sending a burst of energy straight for him. Instinct took over. Dane's hand snapped up, and the energy surged outward, intercepting her attack. The two forces collided, sending a ripple through the chamber. Alara's eyes widened slightly. Better. Dane exhaled, lowering his hands, his heart hammering. He had barely done anything, and already his body felt like it had run a marathon. This is gonna take a while, isn't it? Alara nodded. You are learning faster than I expected, but the real test is yet to come. Before he could ask what she meant, the chamber doors burst open. Kale strode inside, flanked by armed guards. His expression was dark, furious. This charade has gone on long enough, he snarled. Xera followed behind, her presence commanding the room's attention. What is the meaning of this? Cal's gaze burned into Dane. The council has made their decision. The human is too dangerous to be left unchecked. Dane stiffened. Let me guess. You want to kill me. Cal's smirk was cold. You finally understand. Alara stepped in front of Dane, her stance protective. You cannot do this. Cal's voice was sharp. I can, and I will. He is a threat to everything we stand for. His existence is an insult to our ancestors. Zyra's expression was unreadable. The prophecy speaks otherwise. Kale clenched his jaw. Prophecies can be wrong. Dane had heard enough. He took a step forward, leveling a glare at Kale. You're afraid. Cal's nostrils flared. I fear nothing. Dane smirked. You do. You fear what I might become, what I already am. Cal's anger ignited. With a flick of his wrist, his energy blade ignited, crackling with violet energy. You won't live long enough to find out. Alara moved to intervene, but Dane held up a hand. No, this is between us. Cal sneered. Then fight. The energy inside Dane pulsed, waiting. He wouldn't run, wouldn't back down. Whatever was inside him, whatever power the Zephyri feared, it was time to unleash it. Cal lunged, his energy blade humming as it sliced through the air. Dane barely had time to react, instincts kicking in as he dodged to the side. The heat of the blade grazed past him, close enough to make the hairs on his arms stand on end. His heart pounded in his chest as Cal came at him again, relentless and precise. Dane had been in fights before, but this was different. This wasn't just brute force. Cal moved like a predator, every strike calculated, every motion fluid. Dane barely managed to avoid a downward strike, rolling out of the way as the crackling blade left a scorched mark on the crystalline floor. Alara's voice rang out from behind him. Use the energy, Dane. Stop fighting like a human. Easier said than done. Cale spun, striking again. This time, Dane wasn't fast enough. The blade connected. Searing pain shot through his side as the energy weapon barely grazed his ribs. He stumbled back, gasping, his mind clouded with pain. Cale smirked. Pathetic. Dane gritted his teeth, pressing a hand against his side. The wound wasn't deep, but it was enough to shake him. He had to stop thinking like a soldier. He had to stop relying on what he knew. He closed his eyes for the briefest second, reaching for the energy within him. It was there, waiting, alive. He let it flow, let it respond. The moment Cale lunged again, Dane's body moved on its own. His hand shot up, and the energy surged outward, crackling like lightning. The force of it sent Cale flying backward, his body slamming against a pillar with a loud crack. The room fell into silence. Dane stared at his own hands, the residual energy still crackling around his fingers. His breath came fast, his heart racing, but the pain in his side was already fading. He could feel something shifting inside him, something more than just raw power. It was control. Cale pushed himself up, coughing, his expression twisted in fury. This is unnatural. Zyra stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. It is destiny. Alara moved to Dane's side, her presence grounding him. You're learning. Dane exhaled sharply. Yeah, and I think I'm starting to like it. Cale clenched his fists, his pride wounded. This isn't over. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, his guards following close behind. Zyra's gaze lingered on Dane. Your progress is impressive, but there is still much to learn. Dane glanced down at his hands again, flexing his fingers. The energy no longer felt foreign. It felt like a part of him. Alara smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. You are becoming what the prophecy promised. Dane met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then let's make sure I'm ready for whatever comes next. Because he knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. Dane barely had time to process what had happened before Zyra motioned for him to follow. His body still hummed with residual energy, his muscles aching from the strain of battle. He stole a glance at Alara, who walked beside him, her golden eyes filled with something between awe and determination. He wasn't sure what had changed between them, but the air between them felt different, charged, like a storm waiting to break. Zyra led them through a series of winding corridors deep within the Zyphery stronghold. The walls pulsed with faint bioluminescence, the ancient architecture whispering secrets of a civilization far older than humanity. Dane's mind raced. He had come here unwillingly, but now something inside him craved answers. They entered a vast chamber, unlike anything Dane had seen before. A massive orb of energy hovered at the center, swirling with light and color that seemed to shift with each breath. It was alive, pulsing in tandem with his own heartbeat. Zyra gestured toward it. This is the heart of Zephyra, the source of our people's connection to the ancient energy. For centuries, it has remained dormant. Until now. Dane furrowed his brow. What do you mean, until now? Alara took a hesitant step forward. Since your arrival, it has begun to stir. Dane felt a strange pull, as if the energy inside him was responding to the presence of the orb. He swallowed hard. You think I did this? Zyra nodded. The prophecy speaks of a being who would reignite the power of the Zyphery, restoring what was lost. The moment you arrived, the heart began to awaken. Dane exhaled, shaking his head. I'm just a soldier. I don't know anything about ancient prophecies or magic energy. Zyra smiled faintly. And yet, the heart calls to you. Alara turned to him, her voice softer now. You are not just a soldier, Dane. You are something more. Dane's pulse quickened. The weight of their words settled heavily on his shoulders. He had spent his life relying on skill, discipline, and instinct. But this was something entirely different. Zyra motioned toward the heart. Step forward. Let it recognize you. Dane hesitated. Every part of him screamed that this was insane. And yet, something deep inside him ached to know the truth. He took a slow step forward. The moment he did, the heart reacted. The swirling energy expanded, its glow intensifying, tendrils of light stretching toward him. Dane inhaled sharply as a surge of pure energy coursed through his body. It wasn't painful, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was everything all at once. Memories that weren't his flickered in his mind. Visions of ancient battles, of Sci-Fi warriors standing against impossible odds, their bodies wreathed in the same energy now coursing through him. He saw destruction, hope, sacrifice, the rise and fall of a civilization that had been on the brink of extinction. And in every vision, there was a presence, a shadow of something waiting, watching. Dane gasped, stumbling back as the connection broke. His breathing was ragged, his heart hammering. Alara caught his arm. "What did you see?" Dane shook his head, trying to steady himself. "War. Loss. Something else." He turned to Xira. "There's something out there, something your people fought against a long time ago. And it's coming back." Xira's face darkened. "Then the prophecy is unfolding faster than we expected." Alara tightened her grip on his arm. "If that's true, then we don't have much time." Dane ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of everything. The energy, the visions, the prophecy. It was all too much. But one thing was clear. He wasn't just part of this now. He was at the center of it. Dane stood in the dimly lit chamber, his breathing still uneven from the visions that had flooded his mind. The weight of what he had seen settled heavily on his shoulders. War. Destruction. Something ancient lurking in the void, waiting to return. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay grounded. Xira regarded him carefully. "If the heart has shown you these visions, then the prophecy is reaching its final stage. The Sci-Fi believed that when the catalyst awakened, so too would our greatest enemy." Dane exhaled. "You're saying that by coming here, I didn't just reawaken your power. I woke something else." Alara's voice was tight. "Not just something. The Voidborn." Dane turned to her. "What the hell is a Voidborn?" Xira stepped forward, her voice solemn. "They are the reason our people lost their power. Thousands of years ago, they came from the farthest reaches of space, beings that devoured energy itself. We fought them, but they were relentless. Our ancestors sealed them away, but at a terrible cost. The Sci-Fi have been dwindling ever since, our connection to the energy fading." Dane pinched the bridge of his nose. "And now, because of me, they're waking up." Xira's expression was grim. "Not because of you, because it was always meant to happen." A deep rumbling suddenly shook the chamber. The walls trembled, the very air vibrating with unseen force. The heart of Zephyra pulsed violently, its glow flickering like a struggling flame. Alara's face paled. "They're here." Dane's pulse quickened. "Already?" Xira turned sharply to her guards. "Prepare the city's defenses. We must not let them breach the sanctum." Dane took a step forward, every muscle in his body tensing. "What do we do?" Alara met his gaze. "We fight." Outside, the sky darkened as enormous rifts tore through the fabric of space. Shadows poured forth, their forms shifting, unnatural. The Voidborn had arrived. They moved with an eerie grace, tendrils of darkness coiling around them as they descended upon the Sci-Fi city. Explosions erupted in the distance as the first wave struck. The city's defenses flared to life, brilliant streaks of energy cutting through the sky. The Sci-Fi warriors fought fiercely, their renewed energy crackling through their weapons. But the Voidborn were strong, too strong. Dane stood at the edge of the temple's balcony, his hands trembling. He could feel them. The energy within him pulsed wildly, reacting to the presence of these creatures. Alara stood beside him, her golden eyes filled with determination. "You were meant for this moment, Dane." He turned to her. "What if I can't control it?" She placed a hand over his. Then let me guide you. Something inside him clicked. The moment they touched, his energy steadied, flowing in harmony with hers. A surge of understanding passed between them. He wasn't alone in this. Below them, the Voidborn advanced, their movements fluid and unnatural. The Sci-Fi forces were faltering, struggling against the overwhelming enemy. Dane clenched his fists. No more running. He turned to Alara. Let's finish this. With a single breath, he leaped from the balcony, the energy within him igniting. Alara followed, her power intertwining with his. As they hit the battlefield, the air exploded with light. Dane raised his hands, the energy within him finally fully unleashed. Bolts of raw power surged from his palms, striking the Voidborn with devastating force. Alara moved beside him, her own energy weaving through his, amplifying their power. Together, they tore through the enemy lines, pushing back the darkness. The Sci-Fi warriors rallied behind them, their strength renewed. The battle turned, the tides shifting in their favor. Dane fought like he never had before, every strike precise, every movement guided by something greater than himself. He was no longer just a soldier. He was the catalyst. With one final surge of power, he unleashed everything. A shockwave of pure energy erupted from him and Alara, obliterating the Voidborn in its wake. The remaining creatures let out piercing shrieks before vanishing back into the void, their rift closing behind them. And just like that, the battle was over. Dane fell to his knees, his breath ragged. The city was still standing. The Sci-Fi had survived. Xera approached, her expression one of quiet reverence. It is done. Alara knelt beside him, her voice soft. You did it. Dane exhaled, staring at the sky, now clear once more. He had come here unwillingly, a soldier caught in the middle of something far bigger than himself. But now he knew. He was meant to be here. He met Alara's gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And for the first time since this all began, Dane wasn't afraid.